play a more central role in making sure that digital migration happens and full analog switch off can take place sooner rather than later. We believe that satellite has significant advantages over the current DTT network, and therefore the SABC's turnaround plan envisages a far greater deployment via satellite. Worldwide, broadcasters are migrating to online streaming and direct to home, and there is an international trend to move away from DTT in some territories. The faster the SABC can migrate off the analog spectrum, the better it will be for content creators as well as producers. More channels mean more content. It's simple as that. For the SABC, it is important that we appreciate local and its rich content opportunities and diversity, but remain in tune with global trends. Any choices or decisions regarding locally produced, internationally sourced, should be informed by the public interest obligations and the values we espouse as the public broadcast service. Public interest content is critical to the survival and vibrancy of any democracy. It's the universal access imperative that we're working to address through digital infrastructure investment. While acknowledging their real effects, digital platforms and their evolution are not content by themselves. They are tools and channels to reach audiences. In what we do, we strive to make sure that citizens can access content easily and in the language of their own choice. The tendency to treat digital evolution and the related disruption as catastrophic is what holds us back in developing productive responses. If we are to capitalize on it, we need to stop treating technology advancement as a threat and look at the opportunities it presents for innovation. The SABC's approach to digital evolution is not a complete abandonment of our traditional platforms, but to add to them for a wider impact and accessibility. As we migrate to digital broadcasting platforms, the SABC will leverage online platforms to allow customers access to our content and services everywhere, anytime, and on any device. It is commonly known that SABC News Online is the second most accessed online news source in the country. We aim to be number one, but are pleased with the progress so far. While we know we are behind on the technology side, the SABC does not intend to leave TV service to some of our global and local competitors. We've developed a very robust, integrated, over-the-top strategy with a goal that the SABC develops and or acquires its own OTT streaming platform as a medium-term goal. This will allow us to control our own destiny into the future. Some of our audiences and households are amongst the poorest in the country, and for us this is very key because as a national public broadcaster, we want to ensure we fulfill our public mandate. We therefore have a duty to ensure that subsidies for boxes and TVs are found to help our analog audiences to make the shift to digital broadcasting. With OTT and mobile app services, the SABC, working with government, we have a duty to ensure that data does not remain an obstacle in the ability of all our people to consume all our content on any device, anywhere in the country. If we were to become a fully fledged streaming service, it would make no sense if the digital and data divide is exacerbated and putting all of the millions of our audiences in a position where they cannot access our content. We'll strive to conclude data deals with the telecoms operators to ensure that our mobile apps can be accessed by as many people as possible. As a policy goal, it is still vital for the data prices to fall, as this will allow more people to access all our content over their mobile platforms. Even though we have not been able to invest in new compelling content, our existing content is still huge demand and commands the biggest TV audience in South Africa. You may appreciate, Ambassador, that at any given week, through our 19 radio stations, we reach close to 30 million people, and through our television channels, we reach close to 30 million people per month. And that for us is quite key. Our audiences have come under pressure, no doubt. Like other public broadcasters all over the world, we have to find new and innovative ways to survive in a market without borders, with more heavily resourced competitors. We believe the transition to digital broadcasting and OTT and investing in new content in indigenous language is a key strategy to ensure the survival and the relevance of the public broadcaster. What is very key for us is government's role as policymaker is key, as well as the need for us to work very closely with all players to make sure that we emerge into a new regulatory framework that brings global streaming players into our regulatory ambit. We are very pleased with the partnership that we formed with the different role players, and for us, as a national broadcaster, we are committed. Anyway, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share some of our thoughts on this topic. Apologies, William, if I ran over by a couple of minutes.
I'm sorry, it's the tyranny of this thing, the deadline, because we're about to go live on this channel called SABC 404. So please, can the panelists come up? I know that our lovely facilitator will introduce you, but just for the purposes of making sure that they don't go on air and there's you waiting to get to your seats, if you can join us now, and then I'll hand over to Nzinga. Oh, one other thing, please, when we're live, please don't stand up and go somewhere unless you really, 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 really need to. Thank you. Oh.
Sure. Is yours on?
No, it's on.
I can. What did you? Very good evening to you, Stephen Tsepiso, and to our viewers who are joining us here at the Goethe Institute. My name is Nzinga Kunta. I'm a business news anchor on the public broadcaster, the SABC, and it's my great pleasure to be facilitating this discussion on the future of journalism in partnership with Media Monitoring Africa, the Goethe Institute, the German Embassy, and of course the SABC. So tonight we are asking the question, as you've said, Stephen and Tsepiso, what is the future of audiovisual? What are the implications for journalism, technology, and regulation? Audiovisual content, of course, isn't just consumed on television anymore. News isn't just produced by big channels only. The proliferation of cell phones means most people have access to devices and are able to make and disseminate content. That opens up room, of course, for more stories and content, but also adds questions about regulation, fact-checking, and more. What does this mean in an African context? Is it different in Europe? And what trends are emerging? To unpack this, I'm joined tonight by Laura Cantor, who's a General Manager of Regulatory Affairs at MultiChoice South Africa, Mapi Mahlangu, who's the former ENCA Managing Director and Editor-in-Chief and currently a media consultant, Philly Moirwa, who's the Head of Regulatory Affairs at the SABC, and Alexander Pfeiffer, who's the Managing Editor at ZDF Germany. Thanks all so much for your time on SABC News. Laura, perhaps I'll start with you because of the footprint that MultiChoice has. You operate throughout the continent, and through your direct-to-home, digital terrestrial television and online video entertainment services, you may be best placed to give us some broad trends on audio-visual journalism, digital, where it's going, and in particular, the regulation of that space.
Thanks, and it's great to be here tonight. You know, I was struck by the title of this panel discussion, which is looking at the future. And I think that almost allows us to put it on the horizon and say, well, it's the future, let's think about what that future might look like. But I think what we're experiencing as a business is that the massive disruption to the television industry is happening, and it's happening right now. It is not a problem for tomorrow. So I think what we're seeing is that obviously the internet has changed the way content is delivered and has changed the way consumers use that content. And that's got implications for all platforms and for all platforms which host newsrooms.
Mm-hmm. Mapi, having worked in a so-called traditional newsroom to now a consultant, what do you think the future of that audio-visual content looks like, and what technology needs to be in place in order to make sure that that does happen?
So, I mean, when you look at the future, I think it's very important to look at the technological development around AV services and products. And what we have seen happening on that space is that there is the growth in the industry, particularly in the continent. If we look at the projections in the continent, we are set to grow at 7.3%. But there are country-specific microeconomic factors in each country that makes that growth impossible. So you're looking at things like access to technology that Madoda alluded to earlier, and shrinking economies. I'm sure MultiChoice will tell you more about that, how it has changed their markets, as well as lack of knowledge and skills of the just digital platform. So when we look at technology, what is happening technology-wise is that consumers have access of this array of connected devices where they can curate, choose, and create their own world of media. And how the companies have responded, the media companies have responded by now focusing their offering on personal preference. So you find companies like Netflix, and what they've done, they've used data and software to actually watch their watchers, to also monitor as well the patterns. And the result we have is that these media companies are actually making their offering to individuals of billions, not to billions of viewers. So there's a lot of personal preference. What does that mean for us in the continent where our traditional platforms are still strong? So TV and radio is still strong. But the reality is that just 10 years ago, the first generation of iPhone was introduced, and everybody said when that iPhone was introduced, this is a niche, this is for executive. Fast forward to just this year, where MTN introduced Smart S, and they produced 10 million of those at just 300 per piece. Suddenly, you have 10 more million people with this device that they will actually want to consume their content differently. So while we're trying to struggle between maintaining our traditional audience, which usually is aging, but it's strong. We can overstate the strength of traditional audience currently. We still are trying to come up with strategies to be ready for the connected consumers. The challenge there in balancing that is that we've made mistakes. So there've been like flashpoint in all this technological development. I mean, I can think of Google Specs, where everybody thought this is going to work. You know, there's a new technology, and it hasn't worked. And we're sitting with media practitioners who are even scared to go to their ESCO to say there's a new tool of trade, because the tool of trade that we bought 2 years ago, we haven't seen return on investment. So we have a situation where we need to find ways now of running our companies, not only as media companies, but as technology companies, because if MTN introduced its cell phone, what MTN has done, it has told their audiences that we'll do whatever possible to provide an opportunity for you to live stream, to consume content on your phone. Suddenly, MTN itself is our competition, and our business rival, they no longer look the same. Is your Google, is your Facebook, and what is happening in that space is that we mustn't think we are exceptional as a sector as well, because just like MTN is a threat, MTN is also a threat to banks, apps developers, a threat to cell phone companies. So we are living in this ecosystem where everything is being disrupted daily, and we need to almost be agile while we make sure that we are stronger where there is strength currently, but we need to future-proof ourselves.
You've spoken about ZDF, and particularly that channel Funk that uses Facebook, Snapchat, in order to push content out to 14 to 29-year-olds. That's almost future-proofing in what Mappies refer to. And is there a way that public broadcasters perhaps are going to increasingly move towards this model as people move away from traditional media sources?
So let me first say I will absolutely agree with the thoughts you have about that we have to change our culture towards a failure culture. Yeah, we have to try out things, and we have to try out a lot of things and see what is going well and what's not. So I think that's the only way we can develop better program for all audience, the younger ones, the older ones, etc. And yeah, in Germany we see that young people don't using TV anymore. So, for example, in Germany we have about 14 million young people between 40 and 29. And if I look at the ratings for our evening news show, only 60,000 young people are watching it. So, when we started Funk a couple of years ago, Funk is an internet-only offer, jointly operated by the two public broadcasting services in Germany. We have to decide, okay, we want to make a program for young people, and do we start a new TV channel, or will we make the things completely different? And we see that young people are on the social media platforms for all kinds of entertainment, for information, even daily news. So they are informing on YouTube what's happening in the world. And so it was clear for us to be on these platforms with our program, because it's more important for us that we reach young people with content a public broadcaster has developed than to reach people on our own platform. Because I don't believe that young people are waiting for a new platform because they have platforms they are using already. Mm-hmm. So we have to be there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fully, as the SABC, last month there were 26 million views on the SABC YouTube channel. We heard Madora speaking about a strategy towards future-proofing and moving more towards those digital platforms. What regulation and what do you need to bear in mind as we move towards that as a public broadcaster?
Thank you very much. And what I need to really preface is that the market, as we may call it, has no distinction whether a commercial or a public broadcaster. It is the audiences that wants to consume what they want at any time. And the SABC is very much well alive to that. Its strategy is such that we need to be accessible anytime on any platform. And as you can see, even on YouTube, which is totally different from traditional broadcasting, we are very much active in that regard. But I think the biggest thing, which is going to make a distinction, everybody can do anything, but what will be able to make us distinct from anyone is to provide for the needs of our audiences based on what our mandate is in terms of informing, educating, and entertaining. There's going to be a lot of content that is splashed out there with the opening of the floodgates. But what distinguishes one player to another is the kind of content that you provide. We have to provide valuable content that makes a huge difference in our youth, that makes them to develop, to grow, and to be able to deal with the issues that they are confronted with in a developing country. And I think I need to make a very serious distinction here, because in developing countries such as ours, you have a situation where there's still a digital divide. So much as you might be excited that there is this new technology that helps you to do everything at any time, we don't have to lose most of the majority of the people that are behind. And I think one of the critical things is that much as we have SABC app, much as we can be on any other digital platform, are we accessible? And I think this should be what is mind-boggling to most of the South Africans, government and the regulators. Unless we start to look into how we become from a universal access point of view, we start to revamp and to come up with policies that allow accessibility. This might remain a pipe dream. South Africans might not feel the impact of this change. This change is positive in the sense that young people in particular, and I'll target young people because this constitutes a large portion of our population, and this way should be putting a lot of investment in terms of the future. If this cannot help them from education point of view, we as a public broadcaster, we shall be failing. If we cannot be able to make sure that with the partnerships that we have with the telcos around reduction of price on data, and having the policymaker to intervene, we shall not be really serving our public well. So I'm trying to say all these gadgets, all these technologies are all well and good, but we, when we're sitting as broadcasters, we have to make sure that that's what makes us distinct, how we're serving our people in a particular South African context.
Okay. Laura, Philly speaks about that digital divide. Worldwide Works research in 2017 showed that around 75% of Cape Town residents use the internet, while in the Eastern Cape communities, only 25% of people had access. So as a broadcaster, when planning news, coverage, and content, how much does or should the digital divide that stands now influence your strategy now and going forward?
I mean, I think we deal with that as South African operators, talking to a wide range of audiences, some of whom have fibre to the home, and some of whom rely on a 3G network, and some of whom still rely on an analog television signal. So as an operator, our strategy is to try and reach audiences where they are. So we provide linear service of a bunch of compelling channels that we hope people will subscribe to. We also provide a great catch-up service, a TVOD service, an SVOD service. So we're, exactly as Alex said, exploring which business models work, what audiences are responding to. I don't think there's a model out there that anyone has that knows this is the way to do it, this is the way to make it work. But we're certainly trying.
Mapi, I want to come back to the digital divide a little bit later on, but one thing that we have seen with more access to the type of technology that people can make and consume news on is that the way in which news is influenced and journalism is influenced has also changed because of that widening of access, even though there is still that divide. How do newsrooms now and in the future deal with that problem as it gets, not problem necessarily, but how do you deal with that as it permeates more into the newsroom space?
So I think news organization has actually used technological development to their advantage, but there are worrying signs. To their advantage in the sense that we now are using your agile live view system to broadcast live. We no longer really need satellite dish. We have armed journalists with cell phone, which we can actually use as well to broadcast live. So I think in that aspect, newsroom have used technologies to benefit journalists so that journalists can focus on journalism. But what would happen in newsroom, particularly in legacy private media newsroom, is that the arrival of that technology has given owners an opportunity to restructure and reduce editorial capacity. Because what has been happening, we've had this situation where there are great technological development, but revenues are shrinking. And in a space where revenues are shrinking, the first thing, the strategy for almost most African legacy media organizations has been to cut costs. And how they've cut costs in a way that they've reduced editorial capacity in the newsroom. So you have a situation where subs were the first to go because people believe that you can use grammatical app to deal to correct grammar. Yes, you see the quality of the stories that we no longer have subs in newsroom because of just small mistakes that an app developed somewhere in Silicon Valley cannot pick up. So it's been easier every year. If you look at the study that was done by Glenna Daniels, for example, is that 10 years ago, South Africa had 10,000 journalists. We now have 5,000 journalists. So, and in every restructuring process, and I went through, as an MD, I went through restructuring processes. And as in every restructuring process, we have said we're changing because of technological development. We no longer need the team that we need. But what I've seen, I was very fortunate to do over the past 6 months a study evaluating strategic management of newsroom across the continent, in 4 countries in the continent: Ghana, Nairobi, Nigeria, and South Africa. And what I saw in Nairobi, in Kenya, is the reversal of that. Nation Group, for example, have went back and are starting to capacitate their newsroom because they've realized that they lost the capacity of what they set up to do. And what this newsroom organization now are doing, in fact, you touched on the fact that don't rely on other people's programs. They are creating their own programs where they can watch their readers and their viewers so that they can know exactly what they want. And I think that's where to go, that's how we should be using technology. But like any other disruption, I think, in a model where executives are expected to make money and have bonus at the end of the year, is the first thing that they do. They cut, they realign the newsroom and cut resources. And if we continue to have this model of thinking we will make money out of producing news, I think we are going to suffer over and over again, because news, you're not going to make money. In fact, news organizations should be NPOs, because it's not possible to make money once you are obsessed with making money, you start designing news that your viewers want to see. You ignore what they don't want to see, because now you are using also all these programs at what makes them tick, what gives you more clicks, and the stories that they don't know about, that they should know about, you don't give them because it's not what they want. Mm-hmm. And we'll never design newsroom according to what the audience want. It should always be what the audience needs to get. So
the topic today is about how we deal with Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple, HBO, and so on. So therefore, I believe that news is so important for us, because news, or local news, is nothing Netflix will do, because Netflix is concentrating on a program that can sell worldwide. So therefore, I believe news is so important, and we also have employee cuts at ZDF, but we don't cut our newsroom, right? We cut at the entertainment sector of ZDF, because we believe in news and we see the importance of having news operated or operated by a public broadcasting service. So yeah.
Really, I want to go back to ZDF and try and bring it to South Africa. They, by law, have to issue a biannual statement on program policy. Do SABC and other broadcasters on the continent need to do that biannual statement? And how do you think that will evolve as the medium of consuming news eventually moves away into that future, into that digital, more digital-focused future?
News is very critical to any public broadcaster. You remove news, you actually cut off the spine of a public broadcaster. In a developing country, there's a high reliance on public broadcaster for information. In South Africa, it's a good example. I mean, over 20 million of people are reliant on the news from the SABC. And the stats could prove, we could see how the news programming of the SABC has done well in the past audience research. That tells you that the hunger for news, especially in the midst of fake news, you now want to have more credible and distinct news that the population can be able to consume. So moving forward, we need to have a space as broadcasters where there is the playing level field for all of us. I think the current bigger issue here is all these other OTT players are coming into the country without any obligation whatsoever, like the existing broadcasters. So the sooner you start to have light touch regulation on the existing broadcasters such as the SABC, you are going to find that they always move ahead of us and we don't remain competitive as we're supposed to be. You cannot have a situation where you still have to get approvals, you still have to oblige with certain license conditions that other broadcasters don't have, which just beam from wherever they are and are able to access the same audiences and think you are going to be able to achieve a very positive outcome out of the current change that we're going through. So it is very, very important that we need to look into the current regulatory framework and say, does it help the situation and is it future-proofed? And as it stands now, it is not. The sooner the regulator comes on board and the sooner the policymaker comes on board to say, we now want to have a playing level field for all the players to be able to use whatever platform, to use whatever a channel they want to use. You don't have to be. Let me make a very good example. If you go to the current digital regulatory framework, it says, for example, the SABC, before you can have a channel, you must go and apply, it must be published, there must be input from the public on that. But at that time, another broadcaster has 20 channels. It has 20. They actually even taking your strategy. Now, that's the agility I'm talking about that is actually enhanced by a fair regulation and a fair policy environment. Same as we talk about DTT versus satellite, or what we call technology neutrality or platform neutrality. That has to be removed from policy and regulation, because otherwise we're going to be asking which road are we supposed to be using to travel. By the time we get approval that we can use a highway or a subway, people are gone. So all you need to be doing is to say, SABC must wake up and say, we need ourselves on satellite. Nothing must restrict us. We need ourselves on other digital platforms such as OTTs. There mustn't be anything that restricts us. What is most important, which I think people confuse, is that that doesn't change our mandate. We still have to provide that credible news and content that is very developmental, that is taking this country to another level. It doesn't mean to do that you have to be restricted on platform. And I think that makes a huge distinction in how we should be viewed. Our same news that is credible must be accessed across all platforms. Our same content that is developing language, that is developing culture, should be accessible anywhere and on any platform. So, but there are these impediments, and there's a change of mindset that is required from both the policymaker and the regulator, so that we are able to leapfrog and be competitive enough like in other broadcasting. As I indicated in my opening statement, is that audiences don't know that distinction, whether you're commercial, whether you're public, they just want content that can suit their needs.
Yeah, if I could agree with that. You know, I think our current regulatory and policy framework is just hopelessly outdated. I mean, it has achieved a lot. It is responsible for the transformation of the broadcasting sector, which happened sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s. And, you know, we became a very diverse, vibrant broadcasting sector. And the policy framework has not changed since then. And so what we've seen happen over the last 3-4 years is massive, unprecedented change. You know, entry of many players offering audiovisual content that looks exactly like television content. And that has happened in the absence of any kind of regulatory framework. And it's been difficult to even get it on the agenda. I think we are making a little headway now, and we understand there may be a new government policy towards the end of this year trying to deal with this issue. But I think, you know, governments around the world are grappling with this. I mentioned in a conversation we had this morning that I saw something that there's been something like 30 inquiries around the world trying to get this right, trying to say, well, what do you do when you've got a huge giant like Netflix come into a local market? How does a local government respond to that? I mean, these are difficult questions. I don't think anyone's got the answer, but we certainly need to be asking those questions.
Look, I think there's a room for legislative intervention. Let's take, for example, if we looked in the online environment for publishers locally. And Nexus did a study where out of 18,000 URLs that are receiving advertising dollars from South Africa, only 3,000 of them were from South Africa. So you have South African companies going online and advertising on international companies. What the implication that has on our fiscals, and government should actually understand the value chain on online media, so that we can start having serious conversation about South African media companies are losing, they're no longer paying enough tax because they're not making. International companies that are receiving advertising revenue from South Africa, how can government tax that, even using that tax to actually support some of the local initiatives to create content? So there is a room to look at legislative issues around the new value chain in terms of the digital media space.
Can I just ask how much you work together, if at all, because it seems like an issue that is not about competition, it's an issue that's going to broadcast everyone who is affected by it, to try and get rid of those impediments. I know that when MultiChoice has spoken out about certain things of Netflix, the general response has been, MultiChoice doesn't want to catch up and is scared of competition. So how much do you work with different partners in order to try and lobby governments, in order to try and get rid of those impediments?
We have a National Association of Broadcasters, and we have common issues that are affecting us. I think from the language you can hear us, there's one common thing that we are dealing with. From the policy and regulation is that let's level the playing field. And I think that's where we all have one voice, and that's where we are approaching the policymaker and the regulator to say, please respond immediately. You need to change the framework so that we're able to assist the broadcasters. But I must say something that is very critical also in the discussion is the whole funding issue of content. You see, it's all well and good to be saying it's free market, everybody can develop content, but this is a developing country. We know what it costs to produce content. If we are not careful, we're going to find that we still advantage those players that actually we're saying are actually not having a free lunch. So what needs to happen here, which has started, but I think we need robust policy intervention, is the funding of the so-called digital content. If the young people have nowhere to go to access fund and produce quickly their short films, whatever content, then we're not assisting the advantage is able to source content and showcase the talent that we have and develop the industry. It has always been, and everybody, public broadcasters, continue to sustain themselves, and they've got extra resource to be able to assist the process. So we need that, and this is the right time for that to happen.
Floor for questions as we continue our discussion. If you have a question, please may you raise your hand. A roving mic will come to you. If you could introduce yourself, let us know what company you're from, and also who specifically you're posing your question to. Please let me know if there are any questions at this point. There's two questions, one at the back.
Good evening. My name is Sam Kokeli. I'm a former Bloomberg journalist. Mapi, I hear you talk about a model that doesn't work. And you can't challenge that anymore. I think we should actually accept that. But as we do, should we not look deeper inside in terms of how this business are being run? If you compare the four big print publishers in South Africa and how they've evolved over only in the last 10 years, you may find that the model is not the only issue, it's the efficiencies around it and how these businesses are being managed. I suspect that that might just help us. There are a few examples in the world of publishers that have made really, really a good buck out of publishing smart. The Financial Times, it prints money. The Japanese company bought it recently because they saw an opportunity in it. The New York Times prints money out of being smart. The Sunday Times continue to print money because it is the Sunday Times. So we have to be careful about generalizing when it's simply a question of smart business management. When you talk about South African companies advertising abroad, we must be careful about it. I don't know if I'm perhaps a free market activist. I hope not. We must be careful when we punish South Africans for spending money in a global society when they're looking to expand and reach new audiences, and when the platforms are so tech-savvy because ours are slow. So we must be careful about it. And the solution shouldn't be about taxation. It's impossible to manage new taxes. Look at the VAT issue. So let's not even go there. The money is not going to go back to the media. The MTDA is there to help us already with some of these things. Thank you.
I fully disagree, Kelly, with your opinion there. if you look at what is happening online in terms of advertising, is that companies, local companies, are relying on program advertising. They don't know who they are advertising to. So it's not that they are intentionally looking for global audiences. They are relying on Google algorithms for their advertising. And what happened in the process, what was exposed by News 24 expose on South African companies, credible companies like banks, ABSA, Capitec, advertising on fake news websites and propaganda websites because they are not intentional in their advertising. So what I'm advocating is that we need an advertiser that is intentional. They cannot rely on program advertising because the result is reputational damage, but also the result is the media system that is not allowed to grow and strive. Part of the responsibility of local companies is to actually encourage democracy, and democracy needs a robust media.
We had a second question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Serenzi Nekambula, I'm a journalist. To quote an unsavory organization being McKinsey, but they did a study talking about the trends that are shaping the continent, right? So we are urbanizing rapidly. We're an unbelievably young continent, right? Depending on the stats that you use, 60% of the continent are 24 years old and younger. And we are going to have the largest workforce within the next decade or so. The implications for that, if you work in construction, are obvious. If you're at Dangote, for example, and in their cement. If you are an eco-bank in banking, it's very obvious. If you're in telcos, for MTN, it's very obvious. But what are the implications regarding media, for multi-choice in particular? How then do you think about us? Do you still think about South Africa as a almost 60 million market, or do you then think about the continent as an almost 2 billion market? For the SABC, given that you're struggling to compete in part because of your mandate, do you think that if indeed your mandate is limiting, but it does need to shift in part so that you can compete better, so that you can stop going to the Treasury to ask for money?
I think for multi-choice, the answer is content. So I think the only way to compete with these very well-resourced global giants is to tell local stories in different countries. We broadcast throughout the continent, but we're increasingly commissioning content in each of the local markets. So I think that has to be the cornerstone of any strategy moving forward into this new world.
For the SABC, we are not saying mandate is bad. We exist for a reason. Public broadcasters exist for a reason. We are there to provide a unique service that anyone cannot provide. And that in itself actually becomes even our USP from the rest of the crew. But what we are saying is the mandate should be recrafted out of the current existing framework so that we are able to be agile. That's all we're asking. Don't restrict us on platforms. Don't come with quotas that actually are not relevant to today's environment. But the mandate, in principle, there's nothing wrong in us given a role of a public broadcaster. We'll always have a space there. We'll always have to do what other people cannot be able to do. There's nothing wrong with that. We just want to remove some of these hurdles that are around in terms of how do you interpret this mandate, how do you cascade it in terms of measures and so on. So those are the kind of issues, and make us be equal to other players in terms of being out there and being where we want to be. I think that's our approach to the issue of mandate.
On that, I think part of the difficulty is you're dealing with very fleet-footed competitors, and it's very difficult if your hands are tied and you are needing to count up minutes and comply with different kinds of quotas. So I think it's really around more flexibility rather than less mandate for any of the broadcasters that make public service contributions.
Sales and advertising. To Philip,
Philly. I wanted to know the 2 new television channels that the SABC is planning on launching. How different is that going to be in terms of the target audience to SABC 1, 2, and 3? And how different will the program offering be on these 2 other channels? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because I'm looking at the revenue opportunities for the SABC, and should they go online and offer digital opportunities, will the narrative then be the same for all 5 channels in terms of target audience, and how will it benefit the advertiser in the end? Thanks.
Thank you. The fact that we have more channels does not mean the narrative has to change. The mandate of each channel has to change. But I think, I'm not sure which channels in particular are referring to in terms of 2 new channels. We have a much more bigger strategy, and we are intending to, for example, take 404 to go to digital in terms of DTT. We are planning to take sports channels. I'm not even sure which channels in particular. But I think the principle that we are raising is this. Advertisers now need integrated solutions. And I think that goes to what Lara was trying to say, and also what Mark was trying to say. Advertisers will come to you and say, I want to place an advert, not only on SABC One, but also online, but also and also and also and also. So they need an integrated solution so that they're able to make impact. So the new digital space is allowing us, and that's where we're looking forward when you talk about us being able to be agile and to be able to generate revenue in a digital space. So the advertisers won't change the narrative of which channel and which mandate and what the channel is positioned for.
My name is Busiso. I'm from a company called Credible. We believe credibility has a ripple effect. So ultimately, my question is to everyone in the panel. The conversation largely today is around creating credibility in news and content, right? Now we're in a digital space where, or let's start it this way. I think usually before things were a push factor, you know, broadcasters would say, okay, this is what we'd like to show people, you know, we're going to create content and we'll show people. But now things have changed, especially with the news, where news channels are now looking at what's being said on social media and then using that as aggregators to then put it online. So now my question ultimately becomes, what is your guys' vision with creating partners with either small businesses, with individuals, because there's this social journalism that's happening, you know, where people are becoming journalists online, and that's what people are following. So what is your guys' vision in trying to create partners or partnerships with these small guys where you guys can then possibly just become aggregators of this news, obviously based on particular processes, particular flows, to make sure that that information or that content is credible?
I can only tell you what are the trends around the continent and here. What is happening because there is very little funding in terms of content creation outside the budget of each individual company. So we end up with a situation where certain topics are actually not prioritized because everybody's looking for a lower hanging fruit and news that can sell. So what has happened is that there are a lot of non-commercial funders that have come to play to fill the gap in terms of that content. I can think of the Belinda and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is sponsoring health material. And platforms, particularly 24-hour news platform, because that's a beast, there's never enough content, are happy to take material that is funded by non-commercial funders if it meets their editorial standard. So for small producers, I think the best way is to look at those kind of funding where people are looking at focus on immigration stories in light of some of our challenges around Afrophobia, where people are looking at environmental stories, because all those subjects never really get airtime because we actually focus at what we think is the news that sells. So that's what the collaboration is happening in that space in terms of newsrooms, is that if you come to me and you have an investigation that was sponsored, in fact, SABC had a show that was created like that, which was The Big Debate, where it was sponsored by different sponsors, but it met SABC editorial policies, and they gave it a platform without asking them to pay because everybody needs good content.
We've done a little work in that area, I think, largely on the film side with the Magic in Motion Academy, so actually bringing students in that work with us for a year and make movies which are then screened on the platform. And then I think a lot of work happens in another tier of broadcasting which is carried on our platform, which is the community broadcasters, which provides quite a vibrant space for people who haven't broken through into the traditional sort of commercial sphere to get programs on air.
We are almost coming to the end of our discussion time or the end of our broadcast on SABC News. I'm just trying to find out if there are people with more questions at the moment. See three people. We can just pass out the mics to them and then we'll close the rounds of questions for now.
Good afternoon. My name is Sipiwe. I'm a co-founder of an NPC called Lalela Kinako. It's just a social enterprise that deals with youth challenges. My question is posed to Alexander. I believe that per capita in Germany is quite higher compared to South Africa, in the sense that in South Africa, 50% of the population live under just 550 a month. That's a challenge on its own when you consider the cost in terms of the living expenses and everything. That money is too little. And then how does Germany ensure that everyone in the country gets content that's relevant, irrespective of the affordability, one, and irrespective of if they can afford to get other means of communication?
So in Germany, we have a quite different situation than here in South Africa. So, for example, 98% of all people have access to the internet, for example. But we do, to ensure that everyone in the country has contact with our content, we make surveys every year. So, and then we measure, okay, how many people have we reached every day, every month, and every year, of course. And so we ensure that everyone gets content or a piece of content we produce. Yeah. So it's just a survey. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, my name is Themba Sputukele. I happen to be a retired journalist. The world of work, we agree, is changing rapidly. What is the future newsroom that we are looking at? Because I went to one newsroom now that doesn't even have a Wi-Fi. For starters, Wi-Fi is as good as service delivery. That's something that you must have. So 5 years' time, what kind of newsrooms do we envisage that we should be having, since the world of work is changing very, very rapidly? And how do we tie that also with the training of future journalists? Thanks very much.
Themba, I don't think you said who your question was to, or you responding.
The future of the newsroom. The future of the newsroom is lean, and what is going to happen is that people are going to stop to pretend to be something that they are not. We're going to see a lot of newsrooms deciding which positioning they are and positioning their content to that audience. So the future of newsroom, unfortunately, is going to go the NBC, Fox News routes, because people cannot, there are interests in different ownership structures, and people cannot pretend to be everything to everyone. That is going to be left to SABC, where if you want unopinionated news, you'll go to SABC. I mean, we have seen a trend now. Anchors start their shows by offering their opinion on something. That's the future. Of course, they must have a Wi-Fi.
Independent and impartial is the future. But I think something that I want to back on what Spiwe and the other colleagues said around how active young entrepreneurs within the broadcasting can participate. I think community news is going to be one of the biggest drivers for us as a public broadcaster. The integration and working with communities, citizen journalism, that is going to be one of the opportunities that you are able to assist us in breaking stories in communities, in making sure that we really are able to reflect South Africa in its totality. So there are opportunities for what I may call small operator or small business in terms of working with bigger broadcasters like ours.
Got a final question?
Good day, my name is Pumela Ngomane from Curator Magazine. My question is directed to MAPA and MultiChoice in regards to regulating what is online. Currently, most of us young people watch our Netflix, and if we're not on Netflix, we go on to Newsroom Africa and so forth. So it's just an issue of accessibility. MultiChoice for us as young people is quite expensive. That's why I don't own a DSTV subscription. So what are you looking to do in the future to make it much more accessible for young people and to create platforms to create content that makes it survive on an online platform?
So it's a work in progress. I think we are playing with different business models to reach audiences and to find affordable packages for the majority of South Africans. We see, you know, the digital divide was mentioned earlier this evening, and we see that is shrinking rapidly, that even though costs have been high historically, they are dropping year on year, and people are taking up services. Anybody who lives with a 10-year-old knows that they only watch YouTube. So I think for a business like ourselves, that means that we can't be complacent around applying the old models and saying, well, this is how we're going to do it. So you would know what we're doing on Showmax, on DSTV now. We're experimenting, we're getting out there, and we're trying to remain relevant for our audiences.
Are there any more questions from the floor? So as we come to the end of our discussion, perhaps I can ask you to leave us with 1 or 2 points on what you think that people need to bear in mind as we talk about the future of journalism, the future of audiovisual, particularly in an South African context.
Okay, so I believe that we need all over the world, so in Germany, but also here in South Africa, new kinds of cooperations, as I told before, because only then you have enough power to face it with Netflix and co. So we done it in Germany. It was quite a success for both partners. So yeah, just do it.
My message would be that the future is now. I think it's not a problem for tomorrow. It's the challenges are right here with us, and we need to be formulating those responses now.
I think I would like to leave people in the media space with some positive news. You know, on Friday, we'll see the launch of the first African Media Fund, an equity investment fund that is going to sponsor infrastructure and content projects starting from 50 million above. So that's good news, because investors are beginning to see that the media industry is worth investing on, and we need infrastructure. At the same time, when you look at what is happening online in terms of South African companies losing out on big tech companies, there's a program that is currently underway where United for News is actually bringing together stakeholders. Big advertising companies have signed on because they were badly exposed for advertising on a fake news website. They've now asked media stakeholders to create a comprehensive list of URLs that are credible where they can advertise. So I think that's good news. There's a form of intervention that is happening in those areas.
Change is here, and we just have to embrace it. We don't have to see the new technologies as a threat, but we have to see them as opportunities. And I think the current space, if well regulated with policies, it will provide us a very good impetus as a public broadcaster, together with other broadcasters, to really provide a good service to South Africans. What is critical is that traditional broadcasters have a DNA of content. If they are properly focused on that, I don't think there's anyone who can beat them. Everybody's trying to copy what we're doing, and if we do it well, we'll always remain on top.
Much for your time and your insights tonight. That was our panel comprising of Alexander Pfeiffer, who's the managing editor of ZDF Germany, Philip Moyilwa, who's the head of regulatory affairs at the SABC, Laura Kanto, who's the general manager of regulatory affairs at MultiChoice, and Mapi Mahlangu, who's a former ENSA managing director and editor-in-chief and currently a consultant. Thanks so much to our audience who participated for your insightful questions this evening, and thank you to our viewers at home and the Full View team. It's good night from us.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.